And it's go time! Welcome back to another super exciting Flash action script video tutorial. I'm going to go ahead by creating a new ActionScript 3.0 document, and I'm going to save it as Booleans and If Statements video. Business like usual, I already have one, so I'm just going to replace it. You do not have one, so just save it. So let's begin. I'm going to go on to frame 1, type in F9, and I'll explain what Booleans and all that are in a minute. But let's name this with a fancy comment, magical, whateverness you want to call it. And I'm going to say Booleans and If Statements. And let's go ahead and copy all these lines up here and end it. Oops, I did that backwards. And end it. Save. There we go. So we're doing Booleans and If Statements. So what's a Boolean? A Boolean is a data type that'll hold a value that is either true or false. So in our last video, we went over if statements and conditionals. Instead of doing greater than, less than, you can use Booleans possibly to well, do stuff. So let's go ahead and I'm going to type out create a Boolean. Oops, Boolean. And the Booleans default to false. So if you don't give them a value right away, like kind of how our strings default to null and our integers and numbers default to 0, Booleans default to false. So I'm going to go ahead and say var, let's call it my bool, so B-O-O-L for short, and it is of type Boolean. And remember, Flash is case sensitive, so the B needs to be uppercase. I'm going to go ahead and just set it to true for now and end with a semicolon. Now this true is not like a string, it's not the word true, it's just the value true, so you don't have to put double quotes around it like you would for a string, and if you did it correctly it'll turn blue. So now we have my bool. So let's go ahead and create an if statement with this. Let's say if my bool equals true, then what do we want to do? Let's just trace out my bool was true. Yay, super fun, exciting. And just to prove to you that that works, Control Enter to run, and now the top left it's saying my bool was true. Yay, awesome. But what if we didn't want to write out equals true, right? Well, let me show you this. When you're working with a Boolean, the value that we have stored inside is true, and because the if statement is looking for a value that is either true or false, instead of doing my bool equals true, which is going to evaluate to true because it's true right now, we can just say my bool. As my bool is true, it's going to say if, well, what's my bool? True. Then we're going to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to go ahead and run. Now it says my bool is true, so I wasn't lying to you. Let me show you one other thing. With this true statement, oops, copy. You can actually just write true inside of this if statement, and that'll count as well. So my bool was true. My bool wasn't true. I just put in the value true, but that was just a quick example. So I'm putting my bool back. Here we go. My bool equals true, just for good measure, and I'm going to save that. But now let's get a little more complicated. What if we wanted to do something if my bool was true, or sorry, my bool was false, or I don't know, we want to do something else. Let's go ahead and add the next part of an if statement. So you can do an if statement, and you can also add on parts to it after it. So after I did my open and close curly brackets, I can write the word, I can write else if, and then let's go ahead and just put true here and new curly brackets. So what this is going to do now, it's going to say if my bool is true, it's going to do everything inside of here. But if my bool isn't true, then it's going to go down here and try and evaluate this else if statement. So I'm going to set my bool to false. And now it's going to go and say if my bool equals true, which it's not, it's going to equal false. So it's going to not execute any of our statements inside. Then it's going to go here and say else if, well, this is true. So let's see what's in here. So let's say trace else if was true, end with a semicolon, and run it. So as you can see, else if was true. Because my bool was false, it doesn't even go here. So you can add as many else ifs as you want. So let's say I want to do else if I'll call this else if 1. So let's say else if 1 was true and else if 2 was true. So what's going to do, if my bool is true, it'll say my bool is true. Else if this is true, let's go ahead and set this to false. So if this is true, it'll go into here. And then if this is true, it'll go into here. And what's going to happen is my bool does not equal true, so that's going to be false. This right here is false, so it's going to not stop here. And then it's going to go else if true, and then it's going to say else if 2 was true. So I'm going to press Control S to save, Control Enter to run. And we can dance while it goes, else if 2 was true. Now, just to prove to you that this goes from top to bottom with this, if I set my bool to true, it's going to stop after it gets one condition as true, because it's saying if this, well, if not, then try this, if not, try that. And that's how that works. So I set my bool to true and the first one evaluates to true, it's not going to do anything after it. So I'm running my program again, doing a little dance, and my bool is true. So hope that makes sense. The very final part, and after you decide to throw in as many else if statements as you want, the very final one is else. And else is just like an end all, catch all. So it's going to say, if this is true, or sorry, so if this is false, else if this is false, else if this is false, then we're going to do else. So I'm going to set this else if to false. So it's going to say, okay, sorry, I need to change my bool to false again. So my bool is false, so my bool is not true. This is false, this is false. Now anything there, or sorry, anything that doesn't meet all of these conditions is going to go into else. So let's write out a trace statement. It says my bool wasn't true, else if 1 wasn't true, and else if 2 wasn't true. In my quote and my parentheses end with a semicolon. So there we have all that, and my bool is false, false, false. Let's run it, do a little dance. My bool wasn't true, else if 1 wasn't true, and else if 2 wasn't true. So I hope that makes sense. That's the 3 different parts of an if statement, otherwise known as an if-else statement. Play around with these, make sure you understand that part, because this, no joke, I say it a lot, this is crucial. This will be used to move your players, this will be used to detect if you're hitting an enemy, health, a lot of stuff. So that's the first part of this. So let's just call this, what should we call this? Full if/else statements. That way we know later you can look at this and figure out what's going on. So let me get into, we went over conditional operators like greater than, less than, equal to, all that sort of stuff. Now there is another type of operator called a logical operator. And this allows you to string together conditionals. So let's go ahead and type out logical operator and this one is called and. So the symbol for that, or sorry, let me show you something. So let's write another if statement. If my bool equals true, then let's trace out something, right? Let's go ahead and create a second Boolean at the top. So let's say var my bool2 Boolean equals, let's set it to true. Let's set it to true. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say if my bool equals true. Sorry, so we didn't do anything, right? Okay, let me restart down here. Let's get this better in shape. We want something that's going to evaluate to true. So my bool right now is false. So let's say if my bool is false, and so put 2 ampersands, that's shift and the number 7 to get that, and my bool 2 equals true, then we're going to do everything inside of here. And the way that this works, it's going to see if both this conditional statement and this conditional statement evaluate to true. So right now my bool is false, my bool 2 is true, as we can see up here. And let's go ahead and write what it's doing. So let's say my bool is false and my bool 2 is true. Pop quiz. What's wrong with this line of code? I forgot to end it with a semicolon. Mr. Davis messed up. I made a boo-boo. I got lucky with this. It didn't break my program, but things like that, got to keep your eye out for. I'm going to save, run it, and so we have our first part of our tracing, and then we have my bool is false and my bool 2 is true. If I were to change my bool 2 to false, this part of the conditional is going to be false, and I'm going to run just to prove to you. It's going to evaluate to false, and because both are not true, then we get nothing here. So let's exit that out. Let's go ahead and set my bool 2 back to true for just a second, and let's move on. The next one is the logical operator, which is or. And so let's say if my bool is true, or my bool 2 is true, then let's trace out my bool or my bool 2 is true. And the way this works is that the symbol for this is just two lines. It's you hold shift and then the backslash, / right above your enter key. I believe that's a backslash. Yeah, that's a backslash. So shift and backslash to get these two characters. And what this does, it says if either this conditional statement is true or this statement is true. So my bool is false and my bool 2 is true. So this side is going to evaluate to false. This side is going to evaluate to true. And this is going to get run because it's saying or. So either one of these can be true, and then this is going to happen. So Control Enter to run, because I want to prove to you that I am not lying. So my bool 1 or my bool 2 is true, just like I said. So the nifty thing you can do with logical operators is that you can string these all together. So I can keep going and say, you know, my bool is false, my bool 2 is true, and you know, true and false, and you can keep going forever and forever. Just be careful when you're doing if you're using and or in the same conditional statement, because the way it determines the order could be really confusing. So you can use parentheses inside of your conditional statements as well to change the order. So I'm going to say using both logical operators at the same time. And I'm going to need some more variables to help me do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top and create some more variables. They're all going to be Booleans. I need 1 to be true and 3 to be false. So I'm going to say 1, so var true bool 1, Boolean equals true. Say var false bool 1, Boolean equals false. And I need to create 2 more of these. So say false bool 2 and false bool 3. So we have true bool set to true and the 3 false bools set to false. Or Booleans. Bool is just kind of shorthand for Boolean, but anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an if statement and say if true bool 1 or false bool 1 or, sorry, let's do and. So true bool 1 or false bool 1 and false bool 2 or false bool 3. And if this all evaluates to true, it's gonna go ahead and trace out blah blah blah, because we don't really care, because this is like, what the heck is going on here? So when you're using both and or operators in the same if statement, it gets a little complicated, because what's happening is, well, you don't know the exact order of which Flash is going to try and evaluate these. It might go from left to right, it might go from right to left. You don't know what's going on. And honestly, I can't even really tell you either. So I'm going to just save it and run just to see whether or not it writes out or not. And it does. So this whole thing evaluates to true. And that's why it writes out blah, blah, blah. Let's say we didn't want to have this write out, right? We wanted to end up, I don't know, for whatever reason, we don't want to say blah, blah, blah because we've been talking too much and we need to be quiet. The way we would do that is with parentheses. We can change the order of which this all gets evaluated. So if I were to say, let's see, let's split it on the and. So let's say it'll evaluate, so I'm going to use parentheses here, it'll evaluate true bool 1 and false bool 1 in the same at the same time. And then it'll do false bool 1, sorry, false bool 2, false bool 2, and false bool 3 at the same time. So, okay, so this is what's going to happen. To go into your if statement, it's going to say if this whole statement is true, so if we have an or here, so we can say if true bool 1 is true or false bool 1 is true, then everything within this parentheses here is going to overall be true. Same thing for this side. So in this case, it's if false bool 2 is true or false bool 3 is true, then this whole thing will be true. And then overall, it'll see if this and this, oops, let me actually show. So this and this is true. Then we'll go in and go in here. And yeah, this is kind of complicated, but what's going to happen is it's going to go into this parentheses first and say, well, are one of these true? It's going to say yes, because true bool 1 is true. And then it's going to go over here and say, is one of these true? Well, we have or, so it's false and false or false. Well, they're both false. None of them are true. This is going to be false. So we're going to have, in here, we're going to have true. In here, we're going to have false. And because we have an and statement joining them together, it's going to say true and false. Both of them aren't true. So overall, this entire if statement is going to be false. So it's not going to trace out blah, blah, blah. And I know that's a little complicated and it might be a little confusing, but just know that you can change the order of your logical operators and which ones get evaluated first, and make sure you're doing what you actually expect it to be doing by using parentheses. So you remember, if you ever open one, you have to close one. So I'm going to run it, and hopefully I'm not lying to you, and I'm not. So that whole thing evaluated to false, and now, well, there's nothing there. So takeaway from that is parentheses can change the order of your operators or operations just like you can with basic math. So don't get overwhelmed by whatever's going on here. So let's recap everything we did. We learned how to make booleans. So just say var, which is our keyword for variables, give it a name, colon, tell it what type of variable it is. It's a boolean. Remember, it's case sensitive, so the B needs to be uppercase. And we set it equal to true or false. Remember, booleans either hold true or false. So the next thing we learned was how it was every part of the if statement. So we have the if, which is the first part. If it gets evaluated as true, it goes into here and it runs this statement, then it stops. If the if evaluates as false, it moves on to the else if there is one. So we have else if this is true, then we go in here. If this is false, we go to the next one. So same thing, false, we go to the next one. And the very last part is else. And else handles if the if statement, or sorry, the if part of the if statement and the else ifs, if none of those are true, then the else catches whatever's left and it goes in and runs that code. Something I don't think I mentioned, you have to do it in this order. So you have to have if first, then your else ifs in between if you want to have them, and then else at the end. So you don't have to have the else ifs, but you do have to do this in that order. And if you were to start your next if statement, so if I were to go if is what starts the next part. So if you use if, it's considered separate from what's going on here. So moving on, we learned how to use logical operator and for if statements. So how and works, if both sides are true, then the whole thing is true. If just one is false, then the whole thing is false, because we're looking for true and true. So the next one is or. So we're looking for true or true. So it doesn't matter if one side is true or both sides are true. As long as one side is true, this whole thing will evaluate to true, and then it'll run whatever's in our if statement. And remember that we have this big complicated thing here where you can change the order of how things get evaluated, and you can make sure things are being evaluated the way you intended when you use parentheses. One quick thing that I did not mention yet is when you create your variables, make sure you're not creating them inside of your curly brackets, and make sure you're creating them at the top. If you don't do this, things might start acting a little weird, and I will explain that in another video. But basically, if you create a variable in between a curly bracket, it's not going to be accessible outside of it. So if I were to make a variable here, if I tried to get to it, you know, in this curly bracket here, or maybe down here later, I wouldn't be able to get to it. So that's just a heads up. I haven't mentioned anything like that in case you might have accidentally done that. Well, there you go. That's maybe the problem that you're having. And that's it.